Europe is ready to return to work, with nations across the continent starting to lay out their strategies for lifting their lockdowns. But the watchword is caution, as authorities warn moving too fast risks wiping out the gains that have been made so far. Katie Dartford has the story.
One by one, European governments have been revealing how they plan to ease their lockdowns to help relieve the strain on their economies whilst avoiding a second wave of contagion. Protect, test and isolate is the key to the French exit plan. Prime Minister Edouard Philippe said after the lockdown, which is due to end on the 11th of May, it will be an exercise in learning to live with the virus until a vaccine is found. That will involve making face masks available for the entire population and carrying out 700,000 COVID-19 tests per week. Spain, the country with the most cases of COVID-19 in Europe, is also planning to remove most restrictions on daily life over the next 8 weeks.
The maximum duration of the initial trial, if everything goes as it has gone until now, we want it to be of 8 weeks for all the Spanish territory. Therefore, end of June, we would be as a country in a new state of normality.
The plan outlined 4 phases, with each step lasting a minimum of 2 weeks. Meanwhile, Portugal plans to lift its state of emergency on Sunday. President Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa announced that small shops could start reopening, but some restrictions will remain in place for a long time.
We're now entering the third phase, which remains one of controlling the situation. The third phase cannot be seen as normal and stabilising. No, it remains one of controlling the situation, but with a resumption or an opening, either of the terms can be applied, by small steps.
Although most restrictions on Greeks' free movements will be gradually lifted on May the 4th, people will not be allowed to leave the wider region of residence. Some retail stores will reopen from then and others later in the month. Countries that are already a few steps ahead are being closely watched. Germany opened non-essential shops just over a week ago, but it's too soon to say whether easing the restrictions is to blame for the reported uptick in the infection rate. Katie Dartford for Euronews.
Well, with more on Europe's gradual exit from lockdown, we've got reporters in Spain and also in France for more. Annalise, we'll start with you, our international correspondent live for us in Paris. Morning, Annalise. The National Assembly in France last night approved the Prime Minister's strategy for loosening and lifting the lockdown restrictions. So just talk us through, if you could, the nuts and bolts of it. How's it going to work in France?
Good morning, Rosie. Well, France's Prime Minister says the government's priority remains keeping people safe, hence the protect, test and isolate strategy, protecting people here in France with social distancing rules, but also masks, which will become mandatory in public transport and schools, testing 700,000 people every week. That is 200 times the amount of testing France was doing in the beginning of this crisis. And isolating the confirmed COVID-19 cases either at home or in hospitals requisitioned by the French government. So that is how the French government plans to get France back to a new kind of normal come May the 11th. That is when French people will be able to go outdoors without that document stating where they're going and why. Non-essential shops will be able to open their doors. Schools will resume operations, but only elementary schools and middle schools to start with, and only with 15 students per classroom. But the French Prime Minister was adamant throughout his speech at the National Assembly yesterday, saying that we will have to learn to live with the virus for as long as there's no treatment and no vaccine. And the key figure here, Rosie, really is 3,000. That is the estimated number of new infections the French government thinks the health system here in this country can cope with. If that number is higher on May the 11th, we will simply not see the easing of the lockdown at all. Instead, all these measures I just told you will be abandoned for the foreseeable future. The government and Edouard Philippe yesterday was adamant that the most important thing right now is that the French focus all their attention in avoiding a second wave of infection that would strike an already weakened hospital system and would ruin the efforts made here in France for the past 8 weeks.
So they are very closely monitoring the numbers, which are then contingent on that lockdown lifting. Annalise, just hold right there. Let's go to Spain to speak to Jaime Velázquez, our reporter who's in Madrid. Jaime, morning to you. Spain and Portugal have also laid out their plan for easing restrictions. What are the key points of their strategies?
Well, Portugal has been one of the best performing countries in Europe during this crisis. They will start the de-escalation as early as this Saturday, but it will be a very slowly go back to normal. It looks like Portugal is more interested on keeping the good name and the reputation they have built during this pandemic rather than rushing for go back to the normal pace of the country. And in Spain, as early as next week, Spaniards will be able to move freely inside their province, and businesses will be able to start getting ready for the next phase that will start on the 11th of May. Small retailers will be able to open, and by the beginning of June, restaurants and hotels will start opening with obviously limitations, trying to keep the social distancing, especially on those places. But the government wants to have end or finish this transition by the end of June, just on time for the holiday season. Spain is trying to save at least this holiday season because Pedro Sánchez announced these measures just the same day that we learned the unemployment figures. They rose to up to 14%. Almost 1 million people have lost their jobs or stopped their activity. And Pedro Sánchez obviously didn't want to be also the last country to move from the lockdown.
Jaime, thank you very much. Our reporter in Madrid, Jaime Velázquez, and our international correspondent, Annalise Borges in Paris. Thank you both.